Elizabeth, how are you feeling today?
I'm great. I do wish I were on a beach in Malta, but right now I'm in my office in the Austrian Alps. And so that's pretty nice.
That's still lovely. That's still a lovely scene there in Austria. Austria. So I wish we swapped as well to some extent. I never been to Austria. I'd love to go someday, some days there. Elizabeth, why do you, you when we had a conversation, you shared with me that you travel from Europe to the US quite frequently. Actually, half the year you spend it in one continent and then in the other. Why do you travel so much?
Well, I have been living and working internationally since I was about 17 years old. So it's something I love. I love the idea of different cultures and being a citizen of the world. And then my wife is German. So we live every other quarter we live spring and fall in Austria and summer and winter in the US. So we're both on both continents.
Okay. And how do you manage your work there? Because obviously you have to work when you're on either side. How do you
I
manage?
think about time zones a lot, but I have clients around the world. So mostly US and Europe. So when I'm in Austria, then the European clients don't have to worry about time zones. And when I'm in the US, it's easier for the US based clients. And I find 3 months at a time is about the max you can ask people to put up with my schedule, basically.
I see you still manage.
Mhm.
Elizabeth, for the listeners or viewers who are listening or watching this episode, can you explain what you do for a living?
So I used to be an international opera director for 30 years, including founding and running a summer opera company in the Alps, here where I am in the state of Tyrol. And that's one of the reasons why I got to live all over the world and work all over the world, because opera is a very international art form. What I do now is presentation skills, especially for for women who feel like they're not being heard. So my whole mission at the moment with strategic speaking for results is to help women get more women's voices heard in places of power.
Okay. And what would surround someone, or what would be the reality of someone who doesn't feel heard and needs to be heard? Specifically, women in this case, because you specialize in.
It's mostly with women, mostly because I've made all the mistakes myself. So I know those mistakes from the inside. Um, it is women who are talked over in meetings, women who see other people get promoted past them. Quite often, what I find is, maybe 8 out of 10 of the high level women I speak with who work in big organizations find that they have a seat at the table now, but they still aren't being listened to. And so they see recognition and promotions going to louder, flashier people. And what I do is help them change the way they're perceived, shift really the way they're perceived by shifting how they communicate so that they get the results they need and the recognition that they deserve.
Mhm. So how do someone shift from being heard to being listened to?
The problem that I find
Mhm.
is that women think that men don't listen to them, and men think that women go on and on and on and never get to the point. Both are true, and it's not that simple. It's certainly not that binary. There's a whole spectrum. But the tradition, the stereotype is you've got men's language and women's language. I think it's more a case of single focus thinking and multifocus thinking. I think we're using the same words, but speaking two different languages. So that, on one hand, you've got the single focus thinkers who are traditionally men, historically men, but not always. And they are task oriented. They'll do one thing at a time, do it until it's done, which is great for achieving things, but it also means they don't notice any of the side issues. It's easy to fall into tunnel vision. And then on the other hand, you've got multifocus thinkers who are traditionally women, historically women, but again, not always. It's breaking down a lot more as over the last few years. And these are the people who see the world in a web of relationships. And so they're all about relationships and how things connect to each other, which means that they're going to see the side issues that the single focus thinkers don't miss because they're too involved in tunnel vision. And Western business was built on single focus principles. So learning to accept and recognize the value of the multifocus thinkers is very important. And this is where the stereotype comes that women go on and on and on and never get to the point. It's because we're trained that way as children. But it also means that for the multifocus thinkers, the single focus thinkers, you can't just come in and say, oh, by the way, I need to talk to you about this software that we're working on. If they're focused on something else, they're really not going to hear you. And then the relationship focused person is going to think, oh, they hate me. Because that's the other part of the downside of thinking about relationships is then any pushback feels like a personal affront, which mostly it isn't. I mean, yeah, sometimes they really are out to get you, but it's one of those miscommunications that breeds resentment and unhappiness, and yet we are so used to it that we take it for granted. Mm-hmm. And so between people, when I work with my clients, I'm often working with the women, teaching them how to translate. Then you can teach the single focus thinkers how to work with the multifocus thinkers. Once you're aware, awareness is all about awareness. Once you're aware of that, they can learn how to deal with the multifocus thinkers, but you have to get their attention first. And so that's why I say shift the way you're perceived by shifting the way you communicate. I think of it as language. And that's where my many, many years of working internationally helped me come up with this theory, which is if you think that, say, multifocus thinkers speak Italian and single focus thinkers speak Spanish, if you're going to speak Italian to a Spaniard, they'll get more or less what you have to say because the languages are very similar. But for anything important, you want to get a translator. You want to recognize that it's a different language.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a nice analogy. And from our interactions, I know that you like to use examples, analogies, and stories. What's your favorite stories when it comes to helping people bridge the gap between single focus thinkers and multi-focus thinkers?
Well, one of my favorite stories is my client Janet, who was she was the head of IT. She was a senior director in a very famous research institution in Silicon Valley. I can't say what the name is, but you would recognize it. And she was constantly solving problems for the company, and they would say, okay, thanks. And she got no recognition, no reward, no promotion. She was actually stuck at senior director for 13 years. And when she finally came to me, a friend of hers said, go talk to Elizabeth. She'd been given another project that would involve the whole company. And she always says, the gift of IT is that you touch all the departments. And she said, this time I can solve the problem, but this time I want to be recognized for it. And so what we did was we analyzed every person in the C-suite as to what mattered to them. And then she had individual meetings with each person in the C-suite. And for each of them, she said, this is my strategic thinking. That's important, strategic thinking. And then she said, here's what I want to do. And this is why it matters to each of them, why it's going to matter to each of them. And then she asked for their help. So each person, here's the thing that you're really good at. Will you help me do this? And they were so excited that at the next executive committee meeting, they created a vice president position for her. This took about 4 months, which is incredibly fast. But
considering all those years she's been stuck in that position.
After 13 years at the same salary and being totally taken for granted. So a huge part of what I do, or what I find is when people come to me, usually the first thing they say is, I'm so frustrated. And then the second thing they say is, can you get them to listen to me? And usually I can. Doesn't always work. People are people, so you never really know.
Yes.
Like I said, sometimes they really are out to get you. But there's dozens and dozens and dozens of strategies you can do to get around that. What it comes down to at the very beginning, like rule number 1, is what I call strategic empathy, which is to put yourself in the shoes of your listeners and figure out what matters to them. And again, people are people. So you're more likely to pay attention if they tell you why it's going to benefit you.
Mm-hmm. And one question that's coming to mind is, because you're sharing, Elizabeth, about the external, how we can sort of like influence the audience. That so first of all we have to understand our audience, and then we have to focus on how we can influence to a certain extent that the audience in order for them to listen to us. But going from an introspective perspective, perhaps shooting upon here, how do you help people find their voice?
Well, this is part of the strategy that we put together. It's like, what do you want? Who do you want to have listen to you? What do you want them to do? Often it's, I could help if they only told me earlier. And so how do you persuade them to include you in the meetings so that you can avoid the problems that come? This is one particular client I had, Charlene, who was an HR person, and she worked for a group for a company where the executives thought they knew everything, and they didn't really care about HR. So they would just make unilateral decisions and then tell her to implement them. And some of them were illegal. Some of them, the bosses really didn't like the idea of following all these pesky regulations. And she was trying to say, no, look, we really do have to do this. And they said, no, it's fine. It's like hiring the fraternity brother, which, who then couldn't do the job. And then there was a lawsuit. And then they got in trouble. It cost them a lot of money. And she said, if they had only listened, that was a situation where it didn't work. They refused to admit that that there was any reason why it couldn't have worked. And so then what we worked on was the strategy of getting her out of there into a better job where she would be listened to and she would be recognized.
Okay. And so it's about finding a solution to, or a potential solution to to a situation that there is. I'm loving the fact that it's very practical. So the approach, your approach, Elizabeth, is very practical. It's very quite hands-on. So the person presents a situation and you help them or facilitate a conversation towards finding a solution. That's actually reminding me of the work that I do in the coaching realm when we are presented with a potential situation, or I was going to say problem, but in reality, it is a situation. It's the perception that is a problem. It might be a problem, but sometimes it's a perception. Where people navigate the trying to find alternative ways of how we can solve the problem. Sometimes we have to do some inner work in congruence with trying to find ways and means of how people can listen to us.
In some ways, it's what I did for 30 years as an opera director. I mean, as an opera director, your job is to have a vision, and then you meet on the first day with a group of very talented, very smart people, most of whom kind of think they should do it better than you can. So to convince them of your vision. And then over the course of the rehearsal period, pull the best out of each person along the way, always knowing that you have to deliver a result by the deadline, because 8 o'clock Saturday night is going to come around and there are going to be people sitting in their seats. That's what I say to artists. And I had to invent that story when I moved from opera to regular business, because I mean, in the opera, everybody knows what the stage director does. In regular business, nobody understood why it mattered. So I had to frame that story in a way that could be into language that could be understood by somebody who worked in a corporation, for instance. The other piece is that I was always aware, I was working very closely with the conductor, the producer, the designer, is that another part of what I had to do was deliver a result that would please the audience. There are some directors out there who say, my vision or nothing, and I'm going to frighten the audience and move them and so forth. But most of the time in America, mostly in the regional operas where I worked, my job was to make the audience, move them to tears, or move them to laughter, which is much harder, and make them so happy that they would buy tickets for the next opera or they would give a donation. So that was my responsibility to the producer, who was the person who ultimately hired me.
Francis, I know very little about opera and how it operates. For some reason, I'm making a comparison in my head between managing an organization of sorts,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm making that connotation. I'm not sure whether I'm on the right track on that, but to me, managing an opera setup is very similar to running an organization.
Yeah. It's a business like any other. And you've got some people are really good, some people are not, some people are easy to work with, some people are not. Ultimately, your customers are the people who are buying those tickets.
What was a sur- so with the work that you're doing now? What what surprised you? I'm thinking of how I can frame it. Was there a lesson that you didn't think it is a lesson, but surprisingly, opera taught you something that you're using now?
Well, one of the things is the international work, because in the opera, you're used to working in English, French, so English, French, Italian, German, mostly. from the three main languages that we work with were either English, German, or Italian. And so on day one, everybody gets together and they say, okay, who would rather speak Italian? Who would rather speak English? Who would rather speak German? And whichever language most people voted for, that would be the working language. And of course, it doesn't have to be perfectly grammatical. You wind up speaking a whole mix. But that means that at least 2/3 of the people are working in their second or third language. So then the important part is to be clear, to enunciate diction, and to make sure that you are saying something that the other people will understand. And that I have found carries over in speaking. Business is global these days. So I work with people from multiple languages. I help quite often, I work with people who have to give a presentation in English when it's not their first language. And I'm always listening for the moment where maybe this isn't the right word.
Yeah.
For instance, an example is I recently did a little 10-minute lesson for a group on presentations and how do you make your slides more interesting. And so I called it Avoid the Expert Trap, 3 5-minute hacks to engage your listeners. And that looked fine on the page. And then when I started speaking it, people going, 3 5-minute what? Because hacks it's not an easy, with the H, you need a hard consonant. So I changed it to 3 5-minute fixes, and everybody could understand it.
Okay. So the choice of words, what I'm hearing is that the choice of words is extremely important when we communicate as well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Also, try not to use local local slangs. So I live half the year in Austria. If one of the ways you can say I don't care is to say das ist mir wurscht, which means that's sausage to me. Well, that one doesn't translate.
so is it that's a direct translation?
That's a direct translation. Yes.
Okay. I'm curious now. Where does it originate?
It's slang, and it's because sausage is such a big part of German culture, German, Austrian, and in the German speaking world. So it's such a big part of the German culture. It's a colorful phrase that you can say, okay, fine, that's great. And you could make a joke about it, but uh, having I've been living here half the year for over 30 years. So, there are times where I will say, where did that word come from? Uh, Things like that. It's just learning. It's part of the joy of languages. I love words. I'm a really word nut. So,
Because I'm also reflecting on how much context is important as well.
yes.
And linking it to what you said earlier about knowing your audience, knowing what's appropriate for that audience and what's less appropriate perhaps, and understanding the context.
Well, another example is I had a Swedish client once, and I mentioned, oh, I had all these things planned, and I just went down the Facebook rabbit hole, went down the rabbit hole. And she said, what does that mean after all? And I said, well, it's Alice in Wonderland. You said, you mean there's like that Disney cartoon thing? Well, of course, she grew up in Sweden. She did not read Alice in Wonderland. She maybe saw the cartoon when she was a little kid, but that's a reference to the book Alice in Wonderland. And and it has become a part of regular speech. But she's one of those things where she kind of knew what it meant, but it didn't really resonate. And that was a good lesson for me.
And sometimes we say things because we either heard them, we like the sound, we like the phonetics about it, and or perhaps it will help us appear in a certain way in front of the crowd, but sometimes don't really stop and think, why, what are we trying to say here? What does it actually mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because we say it all the time, oh, that rabbit hole, but what it actually means.
Yeah.
So it's good.
Another example that just came up just earlier this week is I was coaching a woman for a job interview, and she's had an international background, grew up mostly in Europe, and she'd heard the phrase "leading from the back" as a nice way of leading collaboratively, but she was applying to an American company, and leading from the back made me think, oh, she's a follower. She's not a leader. She doesn't know how to be charged. I wouldn't hire her for this managing director job because she works from the back. So we figured out another way to say it. And also because she has one of those, lucky her, she's got one of those faces that looks the same whether you're 25 or 45.
Okay.
So it made her sound very young, much younger than she really was. And I finally said, okay, you can use the phrase "leading from the back" when you're in your 60s and you have a huge resume, and you've been the CEO, and you've got all these things under your belt, so everybody knows you're a leader. Then you can talk about leading from the back, but not when you're starting out, not when you look young. And that was a phrase that just came up. And so that's a big part of what I listen for. It's something that makes sense. She'd heard it. And but she'd heard it from a senior leader. And it was not appropriate for her for a job interview.
Hmm. What you reminded of, I have some colleagues and some female friends that have a high-pitched voice. So they sound younger than they actually are. And that I'm linking to what you said earlier, Elizabeth, is that you support women in speaking in a way that they are heard. And obviously, we have to acknowledge the fact that sometimes, because of the tone of voice or the sound of our voice, we signal something different, which might help people to listen to us or not to listen so much to us for because of the connotation that there is. And although this might be offensive in a way, we have to acknowledge it as well. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, gender bias is real, and it might not be fair, but you have to be aware of how you are being perceived. So a woman who speaks up like this is kind of taught. And if you speak with an uptick at the end of a phrase and it kind of sounds like a question, you're not going to be taken seriously because we have centuries of history that the voice of authority is a lower voice. So it is something that's worth working on. Now, here's a trick. This is another acting trick I learned actually is if you start out at a lower pitch, you can let your voice go higher later. So I call this the melody of your message. Be aware of the way you're speaking, how you're speaking, and if you want to raise it up high to make a point, that's okay. But be aware that if you're a woman with a high voice, you're not going to be taken as seriously as a man. And maybe someday that's not going to matter, but it's the reality of the 21st century, early 21st century workforce.
Hmm. And that might be frustrating because we have so little control over it as well. I mean, there are men who have higher pitched voices
Mhm.
as well, and that's something that we don't really have control over. So, however, at least from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Elizabeth, here, is that speaking from a lower voice, I think that's something that we can train ourselves.
Yeah.
It's from speaking from the diaphragm, I believe it's called. So, channeling more, um, uh, lowering your voice in terms of tonality. I'm not sure how to explain it. You might be better than myself. Yeah.
You shouldn't push, and make sure that your voice is authentic to you. Just be aware that you can drop it a few notes, change keys, if you will, and speak in a lower key. If it's really difficult for you, consult a voice teacher. Thus, anybody who gives singing lessons is going to understand the issue and teach you the anatomy, how you're supposed to know your anatomy, how you breathe. Speaking is a physical act, and we forget that. But really, you've got to train your lips and your tongue and your breath to say the things that you need to say, that you want to say.
Mhm. Um, Thank you for sharing that. Actually, that was quite insightful and education for me as well. Something that also is coming up to me during this conversation is that um, what does the phrase "lost in translation" mean to you? We say that around in languages.
Lost in Translation is a title that gets people's attention. Um, there's a speech that I do, a training that I do to help men and women listen to each other. Basically, that's a stereotype. It turns out now. So here's another piece, Daniel. So there's another piece is language designed to be read is not the same as language designed to be heard. Written language and spoken language are very different. So at one point, I thought I would say, let me call this this class really, why women think men don't listen and men think women never get to the point, which turns out to be something that you can say but not write. People get insulted when they read it.
Okay.
So that's another thing to be aware of. So I call it lost in translation. The miscommunication we don't talk about that causes problems. And here's another reason why it's really a problem. When women are not heard, women are also trained, socialized as children, not to get mad, not to, to be polite, to be agreeable, to go along, which means that they swallow their resentment, but they're still feeling the resentment. And I mean, men feel this too, but for women particularly, there's a terrible problem in corporate America where senior women get fed up and they quit their jobs. And often it's because there's a buildup of resentment that they're not aware of. It's just sort of a low grade resentment. Then, when they finally lose their temper, uh, it's usually over something small, it's something insignificant. And everybody goes, hey, what's the matter with her? And so everybody loses. I mean, the woman who's quit, she loses. Often because it just happens from one moment to another. They haven't negotiated a severance package. They just said, that's it, I'm out of here. Which means that they have to live on their savings and so forth. But it also means that the organization loses the contribution of that senior person. They're going to lose all the product, a good 3 to 6 months worth of progress on whatever she was leading. And frankly, to replace a high level person, it starts at $50,000 for the recruiters. So everybody loses. My mission is to get more women's voices heard and to make women aware of this trap so that if you're not being heard, you can do something about it. And you can take steps before you get sideswiped by, and surprised by losing your temper.
Mhm. It's very hard to remain objective in certain situations because sometimes certain words, certain behaviors hit home, don't they? So it's very difficult sometimes um, because when we enter a meeting, when I have a presentation, or when we're acting, because we're human, we have assumptions, we have judgments, and all of those small things pile up, which might um, put us in a situation where we lose our tempers or where we lose focus or objectivity of why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it. So things at a point shift to being personal rather than objective. And that's something very difficult to strike. I think both men and women find it difficult. So I don't think it's gender based. I think it's very human for us to take things very
When you read the books written by the CEO who quit, or the senior person who is then writing about something, the thing everybody says is know yourself. Know yourself so that you aren't caught by it. And make sure that you have people who can give you feedback. This is why coaches have jobs, basically, is to give somebody feedback to say, is this true? Is it not true? Uh, why did this trigger you? Why did this push your buttons? Do you need to take drastic action? Or is there maybe a different way of thinking about it? The more we are aware, the better. And there are scores and scores, if not hundreds, of books written by business leaders who came crashing down and had to reinvent themselves. And then they went and they got help. And they said, now that I know myself, I can do this. So, anyone who's listening, if you haven't got a coach or a therapist, or, do your best to find someone who can support you and give you informed feedback, because feedback from your buddies um, might not be helpful.
Yep. I have a biased view on that, but what I would also add to what you shared, Elizabeth. Of course, I agree with what you said, and I would like to underscore the fact that it takes time to find the right person
Yes.
to support you. It's a relationship, and sometimes we click with certain people, and sometimes we don't, and it's completely part of the process, and we should embrace it until we find the right person. And sometimes we need to change as well when the time
Yeah.
arrives.
As we change, we might need different kinds of help or different kinds of feedback. Yes.
To me, if I use an analogy here, to me it feels like we're building a jigsaw puzzle of sorts, and each person that we interact with, it can be a friend, family member, therapist, coach, or my colleague or our superior, gives us a piece of a puzzle that then it's up to us to assemble the puzzle and show off the picture that we've got. But ultimately, it's us who have to do the work as well. So finding the right person and doing the internal work that we need to do as well. Um, with that, Elizabeth, what is the story behind the client or the person that that taught you the most in what you do?
Oh, the person who taught me the most. Um, I learned from all my clients, every single one of them. Um, well, the story of how I learned to speak to get a result was when I was doing opera and I wanted to run an opera company. I knew I'd be good at it. I knew I'd be great at it. And the singers I worked with were all saying, "Oh, yeah, great. Any company you run, will be there. Absolutely. You'd be great." So I applied to run an opera company, and they brought me in. I was on the short list, And then they gave the job to a man. And I said, okay. So I applied to the next one and the next one. These openings come 3 or 4 times a year. So over the course of 3 years, I wanted to run an opera company. I applied and always saw the job go to a man. Some of that was bias, but some of that was also me and the way I was marketing myself. And I see that now. So I didn't learn that until I started new things. But then, so then I said, okay, I'm going to found an opera company. I'm going to create a summer opera company here in the Alps. I was invited to do that. And great, I knew how to order the scenery and the costumes and all of that. What I didn't realize was that I had to raise a minimum of $100 to launch it. And to do that, I had to give speeches. And frankly, I've been speaking to entertaining people. That was one thing. When it came to asking for money for my idea, my dream, when I didn't have results to show, I hadn't done it yet. It was still a dream. I was pretty bad. Actually, I was terrible. And so my first 2 or 3 fundraisers, nice people came. They were friends of mine and they liked the music and they walked away with their credit cards still in their pockets. And I thought, what am I going to do? And what saved me, this was the turning point, was a woman who was a presentation skills trainer, but liked music, came to one of my parties. And she called me up the next day and she said, there are some things you could do to get better results. And one of my mistakes was thinking I had to do it myself, thinking I already knew how to speak and be entertaining. But, there are tools called public speaking and speaking to sell. And what I had to do was sell the idea that they should donate money to fund my summer program in the Alps that most of them wouldn't get to go see. So I also had to learn how to put myself in the shoes of my listeners, strategic empathy, and get them to donate to something that was still a dream. And when it came to this presentation skills trainer, she was expensive. And I certainly didn't have the money in my account. But I finally decided that my dedication to the art I wanted to do and the young singers that I wanted to help had to be greater than my fear. So I scrounged around and I found the money. I hired her. And the first time I asked for money, I went to somebody's house to ask for money using the techniques that she taught me. I thought maybe I'd get $100. And that wonderful lady pulled out a checkbook and wrote me a check for $3,000.
Wow.
And she said, I believe you can do this. Use this. Use this to rent pianos, for instance. So that was a huge turning point.
And first of all, thank you for sharing that, Elizabeth. And sometimes it just takes one person to believe in us and in our dream to get us rolling. But what I appreciate the most from what you've shared is the journey that you had to do in order to get there. And sometimes there are, so everyone has talents, right? And some of us are more talented when it comes to selling either service themselves and what they do. For some people, that might come natural. But also, there's also the fact that selling or the art of selling is also a skill that can be learned. But if it doesn't come natural for us, we have to learn it. And what I appreciated from your story is that there is an investment in time, sometimes money as well. We need to invest time and money, and um, we need to believe that we can get from point A to point B given time and effort. And sometimes it might take a while. And some good fellows that who believe in our journey as well. So
That was the first time I hired a coach. And that was where I learned the value of hiring a coach. And I didn't think of myself as a coach at that point. But the reason I named my company, my current company, Strategic Speaking for Results, is what do you need to do to get that result? So if you're within an organization, you may have to do a presentation to convince your team to go along with you, or to convince upper management to fund your idea. Or maybe you're actually selling to somebody to have them buy a product or a service. Most of the time, I'm working with people who are selling an idea. And sometimes the idea is I'm the person who should be promoted, or I'm the person who should be hired. It's all the same. Actually, for people who don't like the word sales, and I was one of them for many years, I like to think of it as enrolling somebody in the idea. Enroll someone in the idea of investing in themselves by hiring me. So as a trainer, as a coach, when I'm talking to a potential client, I want to get them excited about investing in themselves. It's not necessarily paying me. They're investing in themselves to get this service that they need that's going to give them the result that they need.
and personally speaking, something that I struggled with a number of years is, but obviously I need to sell my services as well, and in most cases I am the product like yourself. I am the one who's the delivering. And last year I made the conscious decision of expanding the team for many reasons. Want to reach to support companies in from a holistic point of view. You realize that you can't do it all by yourself, like you shared as well, but also because there there was an element of an imposter syndrome as well. So
Mm-hmm.
ironically, I find it easier to sell my colleague and what he or she does best than to sell what I do at my best. So there was an element of that. For some reason, I struggled with um, finding the right words to see what I can do and what I can bring to the table. Because to me, it felt that I'm boasting, or to me, it felt I'm showing off what I'm able to do, and that can be something that some of the viewers or listeners, or you as well, Elizabeth, might have felt as well at that point in time.
Well, this is where referral partners are great. Find the people who deal with the same market you do, talk to the same people you do, but don't do exactly the same thing. And then you can talk about how I could talk about how wonderful Daniel Cassar is, and Daniel could talk about how wonderful Elizabeth Bachman is. It's always easier to promote somebody else than to promote yourself. So finding your allies, and actually, that's one of the ways of being heard within an organization is instead of you saying, I'm the best, find an ally who will say, oh, she's the one who should be promoted for this job. She's great. Because it is a natural thing um, to trust a third voice more than you trust the person who says, I'm the best, you should be hiring me.
Well, last I think it was 2 weeks ago now, I've met with someone, and we're doing exactly what you were suggesting, Elizabeth, is that we are working towards cross um, cross refer each other in a way. And I asked her why, because she reached out to me, and I asked her, why did you reach out to me? And she told him that I was speaking to a client of yours, and they shared with me the impact that you did within the company with you and your team. And you told me that if a client of yours speaks highly about you whilst you're not there, it
means that you're really doing a good job, because otherwise I wouldn't have said so in your presence. So if you
Hmm.
were there, it's only natural someone would feel uncomfortable. So it must be true if someone is not there and they're speaking positively about you. And I think there's a saying
Hmm.
around that as well. So I think there's a lot of power in championing our colleagues in a non-competitive way, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
Because
Well,
well, I'm a believer that of the abundance mindset.
Hmm.
I believe in abundance. I believe that
um,
um, there is enough for
everyone
everyone,
away, and
and
that
that
pushes
pushes
me
me
to
to
think
think
that
that if I don't get this job, someone else will, and if that person doesn't get the job, I will. So in some way or other, things will work out. That might be sometimes overly optimistic as well, but I think the world is large enough
Yes.
for everyone to be content with.
There's an American saying that there's enough pie for everyone. I have no idea where that comes from, but
I want to use cake for some
okay, you could use cake. There's enough cake for everyone. Yes.
reason. I think we took it from the British. Why when we I think when we were colonized. I think it came from there, but not too sure about it. But it's the same thing as tomato, tomato, isn't it? So it's the
Hmm.
same. It's the same saying.
um,
Um,
uh,
uh,
Elizabeth,
Elizabeth,
what are
what are
your
your
projections
projections
for
for
the
the
future?
future?
You
You
mentioned
mentioned
that
that
you
you
have
have
your
your
company
company
that
that
you
you
that
that
you
you do the coaching. What would you like to do in the next year?
What I'm doing now is I'm promoting regular webinars and get it done days for storytelling because storytelling is the best tool to become visible and valued. So, and it is a tool that you can understand in an hour. And so I do regular webinars about storytelling. And then every month on the second Saturday of the month, I have a get it done day. Because, Daniel, I don't know about you, but have you ever listened to a webinar and said, that's great, I'm going to do all of that? And then you never get around to it, right?
Yes.
This is the story of my life. I'm a terrible procrastinator. So what I've set up here is a chance to work for 2 hours to get at least one story written, rehearsed, and spoken. Again, speaking is a physical act. Learn how to say it so that it's at the tip of your tongue. I mean, one of the things when I first started in the training business, in the coaching business, had to learn how to say Elizabeth Bachman, International Opera Director and Presentation Skills Trainer. I mean, you can imagine how long it took me to train my lips and tongue to say all of that.
Yep.
yep.
Yep. And sometimes, at least from what I find, is that understanding the audience is very critical in how you present yourself.
Mhm.
So
If
if I'm,
for
for
example, in
example, in
my
my
case,
case,
if
if
I'm
I'm
speaking
speaking
to
to
a
a
crowd,
crowd where it's very HR dominated, I work full time as an HR manager, so I would say that. But then if I'm speaking to someone who I find it valuable this way, my actual profession, which is an organizational psychologist, I would say that as well. Because sometimes it might confuse people, and people would hear a part which they like the most from what we do. And um, we all do many things. We all have hobbies, and we all do contributions as well. And it's
to
to
which
which
title
title
we
we
identify
identify
most
most
with.
with.
Mhm.
Is
That
that I
I
think
think
it's
it's easier
easier
for
for
us
us
to
to
present
present
present our.
our.
Yeah, and think about as you changing hats. So sometimes I put on my opera director hat. Sometimes I put on my speaker trainer hat. And sometimes I put on my executive leadership trainer hat.
And I think it speaks in a we speak in a way that it can
It
it
comes
comes
from
from
an
an
understanding
understanding
of
of who we're speaking to or what we think might appeal to that someone as well. Because if we want to help them or if we want to promote our service or what we do in order for us to make it easier for the other person to resonate with us, to start building a rapport with, it's good to start off from a place where we can relate to one another, if that makes sense. So it's good to see
Yeah.
who can fit.
And here's a question I get a lot, which is if there are lots of different people in the audience, do you try to talk to them all? And I think, first of all, you want to choose your audience so that the chances of people you're looking for are in that audience. So that's part of the strategy. But also, you speak to the people who are going to be in that audience who need to hear what you have to say. And sometimes it's just that one person who's sitting in back, feeling terrible, thinking, this is it. I can't do this anymore. I don't know what to do. And then they hear what they need to hear from you. And so that's who I'm speaking to. I might not know who they are. I might not see them, but I have it in my head that I'm reaching out to someone who needs to hear what I have to say. And that way, then you know you're doing the right thing.
It goes back to what you shared, strategic empathy, right?
Mhm.
I'm doing this for myself, but I'm also doing it and primarily doing this for that person who came to listen to what I have to say as well. So, and if we can
Put
put
ourselves
ourselves
in
in
that
that
person's
person's
situation
situation
and
and
ask
ask
ourselves,
ourselves,
if
if
I
I
were
were
to
to
attend
attend
this
this
event,
event,
to
to
attend
attend
this
this
webinar,
webinar,
to
to
attend
attend
this
this
talk,
talk,
what
what
do
do
I
I
want
want
to
to
get
get
away
away? What do I want to get out
from?
from this? What are the takeaways? What are the lessons that I want to extract from it? I think it makes our message and delivery smoother and easier because we have an intent. There's an end goal. There's an end game to it as well. So
Exactly.
you made me think
Of
of
how
how
we
we
can
can
share
share
our
our
message
message
clearly.
clearly.
So
So
what
what
comes
comes
to
to
me
me
is
is
that
that
uh,
I'm
I'm pretty
pretty
sure
sure
that
that
you've
you've
watched
watched
a
a
movie
movie
that
that
starts
starts
with
with
the
the
end
end
and
and
then
then
it
it
explains
explains
how
how
it
it
got
got
there
there
Mhm.
throughout the movie.
sometimes
Sometimes
I
I
find
find
myself
myself
that
that
we
we
have
have to speak about the end
so
so
that
that
we
we
can
can give people the context, a snapshot of
the
the
context
context,
and
and
then
then
give
give
the
the
actual
actual
context
context
to
to
have
have
them
them
understand
understand
our
our
initial
initial
statement.
statement.
I
I
think
think
from
from
an
an
algorithm
algorithm
point
point
of
of
view,
view,
that's
that's
the
the
term
term
that's
that's
referred
referred
to
to
as
as
the
the
hook.
hook. What keeps
Mhm.
people engaged? And you mentioned the title as well, so
Lost
lost
in
in
translation.
translation. Actually, what you want to say is something a little bit different, but that something might be offensive. So how can we um,
Speak
speak or write in a way that
actually
actually
shows
shows
our
our
intentions
intentions
from
from
a
a
neutral
neutral
and
and
clear.
Exactly. And I think it's a matter of translation. So the other thing is that instead of getting mad, instead of getting angry, think, oh, they're speaking a different language. They didn't understand me because I was speaking Italian to a Spaniard. Then that, because most of the time people are not actively trying to ignore you or put you down. Much of it is habit. And when you're aware of it, then habits can be changed. It doesn't happen overnight. I wish it did. If I could bottle it and sell it, I'd be a bazillionaire, but it doesn't happen overnight. It's like anything else, you have to do step by step. But the thing is, once you've learned it forever. You just have to go through the process of learning.
Most definitely. And learning is accumulative. So today we might understand it in a particular way, and we might have heard that same statement in a particular way. But then a person might come along, phrase that same sentence in a slightly different way, and boom, eureka. So sometimes we are ready to listen to it when we are ready to listen to it,
Mhm.
whatever that is. And sometimes things just click. There is no formula to it, or there is no explanation to it. Um,
Exactly.
Elizabeth, thank you for joining me in this podcast. I appreciate you making the time a second time round because of a fault, an audio fault that we had. So I appreciate your patience and understanding. And I'm glad on how our second conversation turned out. It's totally different than what we discussed the first time around. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Daniel. It was a delight.